You mean you would like a story now?
Just a couple
Tidbits.
Just a couple examples of that.
Well, okay. Well, here's a story. For whatever it's worth, this is a story which happened to my brother years and years ago. He and a girlfriend took Hawaiian wood rose up behind Boulder, Colorado, in the early spring, and they had never taken wood rose, and so they parked their car and they hiked down this trail and took the wood rose and became hopelessly lost. And the trip lasted hours longer than they intended. And finally, they realized that they were hopelessly lost. It was getting dark, and that they were going to have to spend the night in the mountains at about 10,000 feet behind Boulder, and that they probably weren't going to live through this experience. They had no matches. They had nothing. And so then darkness fell, and they had no notion of where they were. And finally, just scanning these valleys and mountains, my brother saw a set of headlights up on a mountain. And he realized then that there must be a road up there, and that if they could climb up to where he had seen these lights, they might be able to flag somebody down on this road and save their lives. Okay, so by this time they had been out in the woods for about 10 hours going through this. So they scramble down into the bottom of this valley. They scramble up the other side, come up to where they think this road is, and what they discover is the parking lot where they left the car. And what they discover is the car's lights are on. But the car was locked, and the car's lights couldn't have been on for 10 hours because the battery would have completely run down. The car still had enough juice that you could start the engine. So the car's lights had been on no more than a half an hour. Woo, 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 woo. What does it all mean, Mr. Natural? Well, I think Mr. Natural said, it don't mean shit. I don't know what it means, but, and there are just endless these kinds of stories. And some aren't quite so supernatural, but some are more supernatural.
Let's hear one of them.
Well, here's a story I find very, very hard to believe, but that was told to me by someone of impeccable reputation. This guy was up in the Sierras somewhere on a vision quest, and he had made his camp by a little lake, and he dropped mushrooms and a boloid. Do you all know what a boloid is? It's one of those big green crackling meteors that pass over. A boloid came over about an hour into the trip and disappeared over a nearby hill. And he was just amazed. And the mushrooms were just coming on. And then, the trip happened, and he was swept away. And he basically forgot about the boloid. And after a couple of hours of tripping, the mushroom said, now it's time to walk. And he said, oh, now it's time to walk. It said, walk this way. And it directed him, and he walked a distance of about 2 or 3 miles, and finally came to the edge of a lake. And he couldn't walk any further. And so he stopped, and he was just standing there contemplating this circumstance that it had told him to walk, and now he was at the edge of this lane. He was wondering, am I supposed to walk on the water, or what is going on here? And he looked down, and there was the boloid. And it was worth several $1,000s. He has it. He showed it to me. And it was, I mean, it's an object from God knows where. I mean, just absolutely screaming with the cosmic abyss and the karma of the aeon. And if you've ever tried to find meteorites, it is something you cannot look for because they can land anywhere, literally. And this guy found one that weighed over a pound, and he wasn't looking for it. He saw it go over, and the mushroom led him to it. Stories like that, which indicate not, what they indicate to me is that the universe is put together in a way that we don't understand, that it is higher dimensional and we are lower dimensional, and that if you could see the universe from a higher perspective, this man's finding of the meteor was inevitable, trivial, and couldn't have happened any other way. I'll tell you one more story and then I'll stop. This is not a magical story. This is an almost magical story that tells you have to be careful when judging magic. This happened to me, and it relates to the question about fractals and what we'll get into this evening. I was once with a bunch of people in a teaching situation like this at a beach down north of Vandenberg Air Force Base. And there's a huge beach there that runs for miles and miles, and it's very flat and smooth. And I was walking on this beach by myself, and I came upon a little black stone, flat stone, about that big around. And I noticed this because it was all sand, and this was the only thing on the beach. And I noticed it, and I kept walking. And after a while, there was another one of these black stones, so similar to the first that though I wasn't holding the first, it seemed to me it was exactly like it. And I thought about this, and I was, I confess, slightly loaded on mushrooms. And so I did something I might not have otherwise done. I counted the number of steps between the first stone and the second stone. In other words, I turned around and I walked back to the first stone, and I counted the steps. It was like 760 steps. Then I walked back to the second stone and continued walking down the beach and counted my steps. And 754 steps later, there was the next black stone sitting on the beach. Now, what is going on here? Is this omen? Is it magic? What is it? It's none of this. It's that this bay was acting like a huge computer, and it was solving a fractal equation of great complexity, and the solution to the equation was to deposit a round black stone every 760 steps, give or take 8, along this beach. But if you didn't know about fractal mathematics, if you couldn't see nature from this point of view, you would be presented with an enigma, you see. And yet, what is really happening is that nature is inviting you to understand. Nature is taking you by the hand and saying, I'll lift my skirts this tiny, tiny bit. Do you have enough sense to look underneath, to follow it through, to understand? And the psychedelics are very similar. And they bring you into a similar relationship with nature. I mean, here's just a little story. This is not supernatural or of quite the character of the story I just told. But one time I took something, I can't even remember what it was, but it was in Hawaii. And I was sitting on a beach and I was meditating or thinking or something. And a crab came along. And I was sitting so still that the crab cleaned my fingernails for me, every one of them. It just came up to me and worked its way from finger to finger to finger until it was done, and then it went on. Now, that's getting into the Tao, I would like to believe.